I was standing in the middle of a ballroom that cost more to rent for one evening than most people earn in a year, and I couldn't feel my hands. Not because it was cold. The room was warm, impossibly warm, the kind of warmth that comes from 500 bodies pressed together beneath crystal chandeliers, from the heat of 1,000 candles arranged along tables draped in ivory silk, from the blinding spotlight that kept sweeping across the polished marble floor like it was looking for someone. Like it was looking for me. But my hands were numb because I was gripping my clutch purse so hard that the beaded edge had carved little half-moon impressions into my palms, and I was doing it on purpose. I needed something real to hold onto, something that hurt just enough to keep me from doing something I would regret. Because across that ballroom, surrounded by photographers and sycophants and people who wouldn't have known him 5 years ago, was my husband of 19 years, Daniel. Standing next to a woman I had never seen before tonight, a woman who was 22 years old if she was a day, with legs that seemed to start somewhere near her collarbones, in a dress the color of a bruise, laughing at something he whispered in her ear. And he had brought her here, to the Whitmore Foundation Gala. Our gala. The event we had attended together every single year since the year we got married. The event where we had danced to a string quartet on our 5th anniversary while his mother cried happy tears from a corner table. The event where, just 3 years ago, Daniel had stood at a podium and told 500 people that everything he had built, everything he was, he owed to the woman standing beside him. To me, tonight I was not standing beside him. Tonight I had arrived alone, in the car he didn't know I'd hired, wearing a dress he hadn't seen, to an event he had told me 3 weeks ago calmly over dinner, as though he were reading from a grocery list that he would be attending alone this year. That he needed space. That things between us had become complicated, and he needed time to think, and he thought it would be best if I just didn't come. I had nodded. I had cleared the dishes. I had gone to bed and lain there in the dark with my eyes open for 6 hours, and I had made a decision. I am not a woman who disappears quietly. And tonight, everyone in this room was going to learn exactly what that meant. If you are new to this channel, my name doesn't matter yet, but it will. What matters is that what you are about to hear is the story of the single most humiliating, most devastating, and ultimately most transformative night of my entire life. And if you have ever loved someone completely, given them everything you had, and watched them treat that gift like it was worthless, then this story is for you. Stay with me, because I promise you, the ending will leave you breathless. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not all the way back, there isn't time for all of it, but far enough that you understand who I was before that night, and what I had poured into the life that was unraveling in front of me in that ballroom. I met Daniel Whitmore when I was 26 years old and working as a junior acquisitions editor at a publishing house in Chicago. He was 31, already building his first technology firm, brilliant in the particular way that certain men are brilliant, intensely focused, magnetic, the kind of person who walks into a room and makes everyone else feel like they've been waiting for him without knowing it. He asked me a question at a mutual friend's dinner party about a book I'd edited, and 2 hours later we were still talking, and the dinner party had ended around us, and neither of us had noticed. We were married 18 months after that night. I want you to understand something about the years that followed, because it matters. I did not simply support Daniel's career. I built it alongside him. When his first company was struggling and he couldn't make payroll, I was the one who called my father and swallowed every ounce of pride I had and asked for a loan. When he needed someone to write the pitch decks that would eventually bring in his first serious investors, it was my hands on the keyboard at 2 in the morning, because I understood language in a way he admired, and he knew it. When we moved from Chicago to New York for his second venture, I left my own career, a career I had loved, a career I was genuinely good at, and I became the architect of our life together. The home, the dinners, the relationships, the reputation. And I want to be clear, I did not do these things with resentment. I did them because I believed in him, and because I believed in us, and because the life we were building felt like the most important project either of us would ever work on. By the time the Whitmore Foundation was established, a charitable organization that had grown from a small family initiative into one of the most respected philanthropic institutions in the Northeast, I was the one who had spent 8 months designing its structure, writing its mission statement, recruiting its first board members, and managing its first fundraising campaign. The Whitmore name was on the door, but my fingerprints were on everything inside. We had no children. That was a grief I carried quietly for a long time. There had been attempts. There had been a loss early on that we did not speak about often enough, and I think now, looking back, that was the first fracture, the first place where we failed each other in the dark, where we should have reached toward each other and instead both turned away. We told ourselves we had time. Then we told ourselves we had each other, and that was enough. Then we stopped talking about it altogether. And somewhere in those silences, I became invisible to him. I did not see it happening. That is the cruelest part. I did not see it because I was too busy being the person who held everything together to notice that I was also the person he had stopped looking at. I knew he was working longer hours. I knew he was distracted. I told myself it was the pressure of a new acquisition his company was pursuing, a deal that had been complicated and consuming for most of the past year. I told myself the distance between us was temporary, a season, something we would come back from. I did not know about her yet. Her name was Jade. 22, as I had suspected. A model who had done some print work and a handful of commercial campaigns, who had recently pivoted into what she called brand ambassador work, which, as far as I could tell, meant attending events with wealthy men who paid for the privilege of being photographed beside someone young and luminous, and completely unaware of their own expendability. I found out about her the way wives so often find out about things their husbands believe they've hidden, accidentally, mundanely, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. A phone notification I happened to see when Daniel left his phone on the kitchen counter while he went to answer the door. A name, a message, 11 words, and every single one of them rearranged the architecture of my understanding. I didn't confront him that day. I know that surprises people. I know it sounds like weakness or denial or some failure of self-respect, but it wasn't any of those things. It was strategy. Because in 19 years with Daniel Whitmore, I had learned that the most powerful thing I could do in any negotiation, and make no mistake, a marriage ending is a negotiation, was to know more than the other person believed I knew. So I waited. I watched. I made calls I needed to make to people I trusted. And when Daniel sat across from me at dinner 3 weeks later and told me, in that calm, almost apologetic tone that I had come to recognize as his way of delivering news he'd already decided upon, that he would be attending the Whitmore Foundation Gala alone this year, I nodded. And I began to plan. If you are watching this right now and you have ever been told in one way or another that you are too much, too emotional, too invested, too present, too loud, too quiet, too old, too ordinary, I need you to hear me when I say this. The moment someone makes you feel like your presence is an inconvenience is the moment you must show up with everything you have. Hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happened next at that gala is something I need you to witness to the very end. I called Catherine first. Catherine Aldridge, who had been my closest friend for 14 years, who happened to sit on the board of the Whitmore Foundation, a position she had accepted partly because I'd personally recommended her for it, and who had exactly zero patience for nonsense and a gift for perfectly timed dramatic entrances that I had always admired from a safe distance. I told her what was happening, all of it. She was silent for a long moment, and then she said, very quietly, "Tell me what you need." That was the first call. There were others. I am not going to tell you about all of them right now because the story of what I prepared over those 3 weeks is long enough for its own video. What I will tell you is that by the night of the gala, I had done everything I needed to do. Legally, financially, strategically, and personally. The dress I wore that night was not the kind of dress I usually wore to this event. For 19 years, I had dressed elegantly but conservatively, a good wife's dress, a chairman's wife's dress, a dress that said I belong here but I am not the story. That night, I wore a gown the color of deep red wine, structured at the bodice, with a back that was far more open than anything I had worn in years, and I wore my hair the way Daniel had always loved it when we first met, down and loose and dark. I wore my grandmother's diamond earrings. I wore heels I had bought for myself on a Tuesday for no reason other than that they were beautiful and I deserved beautiful things. I looked at myself in the mirror before I left, and I did not look like someone who had spent the past 3 weeks crying. I had done my crying. I had cried in the shower and in my car and once, memorably, in the coat closet at 11 in the morning while Daniel was in his office on a call, because the coat closet was where I used to hide Christmas presents and it still smelled like pine and something that was almost happiness. But I was done with that. What I felt standing in front of that mirror was not happiness, and it wasn't rage either. It was something quieter and more absolute. Clarity. The specific, crystalline clarity that only comes when you have finally accepted the truth of something, fully and without negotiation, and decided what you are going to do about it. I arrived at the gala 45 minutes after it began. I wanted the room to be full. I wanted there to be an audience. I did not plan for it to be a spectacle, that was never my intention, but I was not afraid of one either. The moment I walked through those doors, three things happened nearly simultaneously. First, I saw him, Daniel, standing near the bar with Jade at his side, one hand resting at the small of her back with a casualness that was somehow more painful than passion would have been. Second, Jade saw me, or rather, she saw the reaction of the people around her as I entered, the subtle turning of heads, the whispered words, and she looked toward the door with the particular alertness of someone who has learned to scan for competition. And third, Catherine materialized at my elbow from nowhere, in her navy blue gown and her magnificent calm, and she pressed a glass of sparkling water into my hand and said, very quietly, "The board is ready. Whenever you are." I took a breath. I looked across the room at my husband, who had not yet seen me. I looked at the woman beside him, who was beautiful in the way that very young women are often beautiful, easily, carelessly, as though beauty costs them nothing. And I understood something in that moment that I want to share with you, because it is the most important thing I understood that entire night. She wasn't the problem. She was simply there, young and beautiful and standing in a spot that had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with a man who had decided, at some point without telling me, that what we had built together was less important than how he felt standing next to someone new. She was not the reason my marriage was ending. He was. And his reckoning was not with her. It was with me, and I was here. The moment he saw me, his face did something I had not expected. I had expected embarrassment or anger or the particular cold blankness he used when he was caught off guard and needed time to construct a response. I had prepared for all of those. What I had not prepared for was what I actually saw, a flicker, just for a second, of something that looked almost like relief. As though some part of him had wanted me to show up. As though some part of him had needed this. He said my name, just my name. "Margaret," I said. "Hello, Daniel." And I smiled at him with my whole face warmly, the way you smile at someone you have known for a very long time and feel nothing but compassion for, which was not entirely honest in that moment, but was exactly the right thing to do. And then I turned to Jade and I said, "I don't believe we've met. I'm Margaret Whitmore, Daniel's wife." And I extended my hand. Whatever she had been told about the situation, it had not prepared her for that word. Wife, said plainly, without venom, as a simple statement of fact. I watched her face cycle through several emotions very quickly, surprise, discomfort, something approaching pity, and she shook my hand and said her name and smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and I felt a sudden, unexpected wave of sympathy for her. She was 22 years old, and she was in a situation she probably had not fully understood when she'd agreed to walk into it. I did not stay. I did not make a scene. I smiled once more and turned away, and I felt Daniel reaching for my arm, his hand grazing my elbow, and I kept walking. Catherine was waiting for me at the edge of the room, near the corridor that led to the private reception area where the board gathered before the formal program began. "It's time," she said. I nodded. I was ready. I had been ready for 3 weeks. Here is what Daniel did not know, what he could not have known, because I had been very careful and very patient in the way that people are careful and patient when they are fighting for something that has always mattered deeply to them. The Whitmore Foundation, for all that it bore his name, was governed by a 9-member board. Daniel served as honorary chairman, a largely ceremonial role he had accepted years ago because it looked good and required very little of his time. The actual governance of the foundation, the decisions about grants, about partnerships, about the direction of the organization's work, rested with the board. And in the 18 months since Daniel had begun his quiet withdrawal from our life together, I had been building. Not scheming. Building. Relationships. Trust. A record of the work I had done for this organization over more than a decade. 7 of the 9 board members were in that building tonight. And 6 of those 7 had agreed, in the weeks leading up to this event, to support a resolution that would be voted on at tonight's meeting. A resolution that would formalize, for the first time in the Foundation's history, the role of executive director, a paid, governing position with real authority and real accountability. And the board had agreed 6-1 that the person who had earned that position, who had built the infrastructure and the relationships and the record that made the foundation what it was me. Daniel had not been notified. That was technically within the board's authority since he was not a voting member. He would have been notified, through the proper channels, within 48 hours of the vote. But because Catherine was Catherine and understood the poetry of certain moments, the vote had been scheduled for the Foundation's annual gathering. Tonight, I am not going to sit here and tell you that I engineered this for dramatic effect. I will tell you that when Catherine asked me what night I wanted to hold the vote, I said tonight. And I felt no guilt about that then, and I feel no guilt about it now. The formal program began at 8 o'clock. The ballroom was arranged for it, tables cleared to the edges, chairs set before a low stage with a podium and 2 large screens. The Foundation's executive team presented the year's results. Grants given, communities served. The numbers were extraordinary, and as I sat in the second row and listened to programs I had helped design being described to an audience that applauded for them, I felt something I had almost forgotten the sensation of: pride. Clean, uncomplicated, fully earned pride. Daniel was seated 3 tables away. Jade was beside him. I did not look at them during the presentation. I did not need to. Then Catherine went to the podium. She spoke about the Foundation's history. She spoke about its mission and its growth over 12 years. She spoke about the particular kind of institutional strength that comes not from a name on a building, but from the consistent, dedicated, unglamorous work of people who believe in something larger than themselves. And then she said, "The board of the Whitmore Foundation is proud to announce the creation of the position of executive director, and to confirm that, by a vote of 6-1 at this evening's board meeting, that position has been offered to and accepted by the person who has done more to build this foundation than any single individual in its history." She said my name. The room was not silent for the reason rooms are usually silent. It was not the silence of indifference or confusion. It was the silence of 500 people simultaneously processing something that rearranged their understanding. Because everyone in that room knew who I was. Everyone in that room had seen me walk in tonight. And most of them, had a very good sense of what was happening in the Whitmore marriage, the way people always have a very good sense of these things when they move in the same circles long enough. I walked to the stage. I shook Catherine's hand. I stood at the podium and I looked out at that room, and the applause was already building, and I let it. I let it wash over me for a moment because I had earned that moment and I was not going to rush through it. And then I spoke. I want to tell you what I said as clearly as I can remember it, because what I said that night has been repeated back to me many times by many different people, and I think it matters. I said, 18 years ago, I helped write the mission statement of this foundation. I said then, and I believe now, that the measure of any institution is not its resources but its values, what it chooses to protect, what it refuses to compromise, what it shows up for, even when showing up is inconvenient. I paused, I looked at the room. I did not look at Daniel's table. I didn't need to. I said, I have spent my adult life showing up for things I believed in. Tonight is no different, and I am deeply honored to continue this work. The room stood up. Not all at once, but in a wave, starting from the left and moving right, and by the time it reached the back of the room it was complete and the sound was extraordinary. I stood at that podium in my wine-red dress with my grandmother's diamonds at my ears, and I let myself feel every single second of it because I had paid for it in full. I found Daniel's face in the crowd. He was still seated. Jade was standing because she understood enough to recognize the moment, even if she didn't understand all of it. Daniel was sitting very still, his hands flat on the table, and he was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on his face in years. Maybe ever. He looked like a man who had just understood something enormous, too late, in front of everyone he knew. I held his gaze for 3 seconds, then I looked away. I was finished looking at him. If you are still watching, and I hope you are, because we are getting to the part I need you to hear the most, I want to pause here and speak directly to you for a moment. Not about Daniel, not about me, about you. Because this story is not really about a gala or a dress or a dramatic vote in a ballroom. It is about something that happens to people all the time, in 1,000 smaller, quieter, less public ways. It is about the moment when someone you have given your best years to looks at what you've built and decides it doesn't impress them anymore. When someone who depended on your strength decides that your strength is ordinary. When someone mistakes your grace for weakness, your patience for passivity, your love for something they can set aside when something newer and shinier comes along. And here is what I know from the other side of that experience. You are not diminished by being underestimated. You are not less because someone chose to see you as less. And the most powerful thing you can do, more powerful than confrontation, more powerful than anger, more powerful than any argument you will ever have behind a closed door, is to quietly, methodically, with absolute dignity, build something so undeniable that the room stands up for it. You are not too much. You have never been too much. And the right people, the people who deserve you, will never make you feel like you are. Write your city in the comments. I want to know where you are watching from. And tell me, has there ever been a moment in your life when someone underestimated you and you found a way to rise above it? Tell me your story. I want to read every single one. The rest of that evening moved the way evenings move when something enormous has already happened. Everything that follows feels both necessary and slightly surreal, like the chapters after the climax of a book you've been reading for years. I did not leave right away. That was important. Leaving would have looked like escape, and I was not escaping. This was my foundation, and these were my people. And I stayed for 2 more hours, and I moved through that room, and I had conversations, and I accepted congratulations, and I drank a single glass of champagne, and I did not, at any point, look like a woman who was also dissolving inside. Because that was the thing I had promised myself 3 weeks ago in the coat closet that smelled like pine. I was allowed to grieve, and I would grieve, and there were still hard nights ahead of me, many of them. But not here. Not in front of an audience that would remember forever however I chose to be tonight. Daniel found me at just past 9:30. I was speaking with a couple from the Foundation's early donor base, warm people in their 70s who had known us since the beginning, who had watched what I'd built with genuine affection. He waited at a respectful distance, the way you wait for someone you understand you no longer have the right to interrupt. When the conversation ended and the couple moved on, he stepped forward. He said, "Margaret." And then he stopped. He didn't seem to have anything after that. I looked at him for a long moment. 19 years is a long time. You don't stop loving someone over the course of a single evening, no matter how clearly they have shown you who they are. I was aware, standing there, of every year between us of the good years, when we had been extraordinary together, when we had built things and believed in things and laughed at things at midnight in our kitchen in a way I haven't laughed since. I was aware of all of it, and I was aware that it was over. I said, "You should go find your guest, Daniel." "She's probably wondering where you are." He flinched, just slightly. He said, "I didn't think you'd come." I said, "I know." He said, "You looked, Margaret, you were extraordinary up there tonight." And I want to tell you what I felt when he said that, because it matters. I felt nothing. Not coldness, not triumph, not bitterness. I felt nothing, which was how I knew that I had truly made my peace with it. The compliment had nowhere to land. It was too late, and we both knew it, and he was saying it not for my benefit but for his own, the last-ditch gesture of a man who has finally grasped what he let go of and has no way of getting it back. I said, "I know that too." And I smiled at him, the way you smile at someone you once loved with your whole heart and have finally forgiven, and I turned and walked away. Jade had already gone. I found out later that she had slipped out sometime during the standing ovation, whether from embarrassment or practical wisdom, or simply because she was 22 years old and had better options for her Saturday night, I don't know. It doesn't matter. She owed me nothing and I bore her nothing. She was a person who had briefly been in the wrong place, and she had removed herself from it with more grace, in the end, than Daniel had. I said goodbye to Catherine in the lobby. She held both my hands in hers for a moment and looked at me with the particular expression of a friend who has watched you survive something and is fiercely proud of you and also exhausted on your behalf. She said, "Breakfast. Sunday, I'm making waffles." I said, "I'll be there." I walked out of the Whitmore Foundation Gala into a night that was cold and clear and smelled like October, and I got into the car I had hired, and I drove home to the house that I had already, quietly, legally, begun the process of determining my fair share of, and I sat in the driveway for a while without going inside. I want to be honest with you about what happened in that car, because this is not a story about a woman who triumphed and felt nothing but triumph. I cried. I cried for the marriage, and for the version of Daniel I had fallen in love with at 26, and for the children we never had, and for the coat closet that smelled like pine, and for all the ordinary Tuesday evenings I had spent believing we were fine when we were not. I cried hard and thoroughly in the dark of my own driveway because that is what the truth costs and there is no way around it. And then I went inside, and I made tea. And I sat at the kitchen table with my grandmother's diamond earrings still on and my wine red dress pooling around the chair, and I opened my laptop, and I looked at the documents that needed my attention in my new role, and I began. I want to tell you what happened in the months that followed, quickly, because this is a story, not a document, and you deserve to know how it ends. Daniel and I divorced. It was not clean or simple or painless, because 19 years of shared life never untangles neatly. And there were lawyers and negotiations and several conversations that were harder than anything I have described tonight. But I had prepared well, and I had good people beside me. And when it was over, I had the house, a fair settlement, and a role at the foundation that had become, in the months since that night, something extraordinary. In my first year as executive director of the Whitmore Foundation, we raised more money than the organization had raised in the previous 3 years combined. We launched 2 new initiatives in communities that had never been on the foundation's radar. We hired 6 new staff members. We were written about in 3 national publications, none of which mentioned Daniel's name. He remarried. Not to Jade, that relationship, such as it was, had apparently concluded before the ink was dry on our divorce papers. Someone else, someone I don't know and don't need to know. I wish him, genuinely, without irony, a life that is better for him than ours had become. That is not a performance of graciousness. It is simply what I actually feel. When you have truly let something go, you stop needing it to have been wrong. As for me, I am not going to tell you that I found some perfect happiness immediately after all of this, because that is not how life works, and you deserve more honesty than that. What I found was something better than happiness. I found clarity. I found the particular, quiet satisfaction of a life that belongs entirely to you, every decision, every Tuesday, every meal, every risk, and every reward. I found what it feels like to walk into a room as yourself, not as someone's wife, not as a supporting role in someone else's story. I found out what I was made of when someone tried to make me disappear. It turned out I was made of quite a lot. Before I go, I want to speak one more time to anyone out there who is in the middle of their own version of this story. Not necessarily a gala, not necessarily this particular kind of betrayal, but some version of being set aside by someone who should have known better. Some version of being told, through words or actions, that you don't belong in the room you built. Here is what I learned. You don't have to prove anything in a single night. You don't have to arrive in a red dress and make it a moment. Some of you will make your case slowly, in small ways, over long stretches of time that feel invisible while they're happening. That is just as valid. That is just as powerful. The form doesn't matter. What matters is that you do not decide, on someone else's behalf, that they were right about you. You don't decide that because they couldn't see your value, it isn't there. Your value is not a function of whether someone chooses to recognize it. Build anyway. Stay anyway. Become, in spite of everything, exactly who you always had the potential to be. And when the room eventually stands for you, and it will in one form or another, on a night you may not be able to predict, you will know that you earned every single second of it. Thank you for spending this hour with me. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of something, if it gave you something you needed today, please share it with someone who needs to hear it too. Leave a like, it helps more people find this story, and some of those people are sitting in coat closets right now or in driveways in the dark, and they need to know that this is not the end of their story. Tell me your name and your city in the comments. I want to know where in the world you're watching from. And tell me, have you ever had a moment where you had to show up for yourself when no one else would? Tell me. I'll be reading. And if you're new here, welcome. This is a place where we tell the truth about the hard things, and we do not flinch, and we do not disappear. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because in the next video, I'm going to tell you about the phone call I received 3 months after this night, a call from Daniel at midnight with something to say that I did not expect, and that changed, in a quiet way, something I thought I'd already finished feeling. That conversation is its own story, and it is worth waiting for. I'll see you there. Subscribe to the channel. Share with someone who needs it today. And remember, the room that matters most is the one you walk into as yourself.